All right, folks. So this is a pretty infuriating segment. So we start out with a little bit of video from Damien. High-level sources in the U.S. government confirm every single person on the deportation flights of terrorists sent to El Salvador are criminals. MS-13 or Tren de Aragua. Sarah Carter on exclusive interview with Sean Hannity on Fox News. So here's Sarah Carter guaranteeing us that every deportee to an El Salvadoran prison is a violent gang member.
With more on the mega prisons now housing some more than 100 criminals deported from our country. Fox News contributor Sarah Carter is with us. Sarah, you know these prisons well. Tell us.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to visit the prison, Sacat Maximum Security Prison in El Salvador last year, Sean, and it was incredible. The cooperation with President Bukele, he allowed me full access to the prison. This facility is like nothing I've ever seen in my life. And I've had the opportunity to visit other areas in the world, other prisons in the world. This is highly organized. These people are detained. They are all Tren de Aragua. In fact, Sean, I spoke to several high-level sources this evening who said that everybody that was on that plane was either a Tren de Aragua member from Venezuela or MS-13. All of these people are the most notorious gang members that you can imagine that were allowed in our nation under President Biden when he opened the borders and allowed people to come in here without any background checks. This is about protecting the American people. It is about protecting our national security, and it is about protecting the Western Hemisphere. And by the way, for those people that are crying about whether or not these people are given their due process, yes, they came in here illegally. They are being sent back. But what about the due process of the victims? What about Jocelyn Nungare? What about Laken Riley? What about all the other people that have been murdered and slaughtered by these people that have no loyalty to any nation, no loyalty to any person, and would do and have done the most heinous crimes, even to children? We know there are people within that group that are child predators. These are robbers. These are murderers. These are the worst of the worst. So I can tell you this, that El Salvador, I've spoken to officials in El Salvador this weekend. They are willing and ready to work with the United States government again. They're ready to work with President Trump. And I can tell you this, that in the United States right now, we have an administration that is sending a message across the globe. Do not come to the United States. You will be deported. You will be put in a maximum security facility. And we are now working with our partners in the Western Hemisphere to ensure that that is done.
All right, Jesus, that's enough. What, does she have gills, this woman? You ever take a breath? God, shut up. Jesus Christ. You ever hear of finishing a sentence and starting a new sentence? I'm looking for a place to cut her off. I can't find one. God almighty. Anyway, so much of what she says there, absolute nonsense. But if you listen to Fox News, they would have you believe that every one of these deportees are violent criminals and that, hey, why should they get due process when murder victims didn't get due process? Just a ridiculous formulation. But of course, you have to rely on such a ridiculous formulation when the truth is not on your side. And of course, the truth is not on their side. So this was a very high-profile case over the weekend. Venezuelan soccer player deported over tattoo. Attorney speaks out. So Jersey Reyes Barrios, a Venezuelan soccer player and coach, was deported to El Salvador under the Alien Enemies Act after U.S. officials accused him of gang ties because of a tattoo that looked like a Real Madrid logo, his attorneys says. Barrios legally entered the U.S. in 2024, but was detained at a high-security facility. He showed proof he had no criminal record and was not in a gang, but on March 15th, he was suddenly deported to El Salvador without warning. His attorney says his family has lost all contact with him, and no one knows where he is now. So here he is, that had a tattoo of a crown, and was deported because he was assumed that he was a gang member because of said tattoo. His case is laid out in a little more detail in this article, along with some others. We're finally seeing the evidence, quote unquote, against the migrants deported by Trump It's unbelievable. After the Trump administration rounded up hundreds of Venezuelan migrants around the country without notice or court hearings and sent them off to a prison in El Salvador, we're finally getting details on who was deported and why. And the more we learn, the more obvious it becomes why the government is so eager to expel these individuals without any semblance of due process. It claims these men are terrorists by virtue of their alleged membership in the Tren de Aragua gang, but evidence of this affiliation is weak to the point of non-existence. Consider Jersey Reyes Barrios, one victim of the deportations, a professional soccer player who had fled Venezuela after protesting against dictator Nicolas Maduro and was living peacefully in the U.S. until the government snatched him up and deported him to El Salvador. Lynette Tobin, Barrios' attorney, submitted a declaration in federal court that detailed the disturbing reasons why her client was targeted by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. After entering the U.S. last year, Barrios was scheduled to have an asylum hearing in April, but on Saturday he was arrested and held at a San Diego detention facility after ICE agents accused him of being a member of Tren de Aragua, the Venezuelan gang that President Donald Trump has been fixated on to fulfill his mass deportation plan. ICE's accusations were based on two things. First, Barrios has a tattoo on his arm of a crown sitting atop a soccer ball that federal immigration authorities allege is proof of gang membership. In reality, Tobin wrote, the tattoo was inspired by the Real Madrid soccer team, which is also circular in shape and features a crown. Second, Barrios posted a photo of himself on social media in which he's gesturing with both hands with his middle fingers down. This, federal agents claimed, was also proof of gang membership, except that Barrios' hand gesture actually means I love you in sign language and is also commonly used as a symbol of rock and roll. This implausible misinterpretation of benign tattoos is a common theme across migrants caught up in this unlawful scheme. Okay, so before we get off of the Barrios case, not only is there no evidence that he is part of this gang, but he is an anti-Maduro dissident, which if there's any group of Latin American migrants who have every reason to believe that they will be granted asylum status and allowed to stay in the United States, it's people like him. We love anti-communist Latin American dissidents. We love anti-Castro Cubans. We love anti-Maduro Venezuelans. So this guy had every reason to believe that he was going to be fine. He had a hearing scheduled in April, and he's rounded up and shipped off basically to hell, which we'll get to in a minute. Do you have anything while we're paused for a minute?
Well, it seems like part of what's happened here, under Giuliani in New York, they always denied it because it's illegal. But it was very clear that the cops had a quota.
Right.
And when you give people a quota, they start, I got a ticket for stepping out of a cab, walking across the sidewalk 3 feet to my front door with a beer. The cop did a U-turn and came back like I was carrying a gun.
Right.
Because, hey, man, they got their quota and they got to make it. So you take a bunch of not very bright authoritarian border agents and ICE agents, and you tell them, we got to make numbers. This is what happens. Well, they're going to grab anybody. They're cracking down. I'll probably do a story about it this week. They took a German guy, held him for 2 weeks, put him naked under a cold shower. He had to be hospitalized. They detained a Canadian actress. I am very glad not to be in the tour business right now. Like, why? You think people are going to book vacations here? There are all of these horror stories now about tourists, literally tourists who are being thrown into ICE detention.
Well, speaking of quotas and numbers, I mean, wait till you hear what happens on the El Salvadoran side of this. But that's a little bit later. ICE alleged that another individual known as EV was a member of Tren de Aragua based on his tattoos, which feature anime, flowers, and animals, as well as a crown of thorns. Agents reportedly believe that the crown indicates gang membership. But as his lawyer explained, it is in fact a tribute to his grandmother, whose date of death appears at the base of the crown. Others face similarly baseless accusations. One migrant, known as JABV, has tattoos of a rose, a clock, and a crown with his son's name on it, none of which indicates gang membership. Like many of these men, he has never been arrested, charged, or convicted of a crime in Venezuela or the United States. But ICE agents said that tattoos were proof of Tren de Aragua membership and deported him. Another migrant, LG, has 3 tattoos. One is a rosary, the other is his partner's name, and the third is a rose and a clock. So no crown there at all. None have any connection to a gang, but ICE accused him of gang membership anyway. It made the same claim about Agnello Jose Sarabia because his tattoos of a Bible verse and a rose with money as petals, and about Franco Caraballo because of a tattoo celebrating his daughter. The list goes on, and they link to some legal documents citing further examples. Adding insult to injury, many of these migrants came to the U.S. seeking refugee from Tren de Aragua, only to then be accused of membership in that very gang. One person whose name was redacted had applied for asylum 6 months before being unlawfully deported this month due to my fear of harm and mistreatment from multiple criminal groups, including the Tren de Aragua gang. According to his attorney's declaration, immigration agents detained him while he was living in a New York homeless shelter with his family. The government's theory appears to be that any Venezuelan migrant with tattoos is presumptively a member of Tren de Aragua until proven otherwise, except that they cannot prove otherwise since they have been denied due process. Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, precisely because he claims it allows him to expel non-citizens without the annoyance of judicial oversight. Here's another example that was just posted to X. This is up to 1.3 million views. Tim Miller posts, "You are telling me this man is Tren de Aragua. He was so dangerous we had to send him to a foreign prison camp to be beaten with no due process? Do you have any soul left, Marco Rubio?" He's referring to this.
He never had one.
Yeah. This is the story that he's linking to. Gay Venezuelan asylum seeker disappeared to Salvadoran mega prison under Trump order. This is a Rachel Maddow segment. For some reason, I can't find the video online anywhere. Otherwise, I would show it to you. I don't know why it's not there, but that was reported on in The Advocate. I know Crystal and Sagar debated this, and Sagar was like, what difference does it make that he's gay? What difference does it make that he's gay? Which obviously, I mean, I don't want to get into really upsetting detail, but it's not a safe place for most people. It's certainly not a safe place for gay people. Glenn Greenwald, all available evidence strongly suggests that at least one of the Venezuelans shipped to a monstrous prison in El Salvador for life has nothing to do with Tren de Aragua, though the refusal to allow hearings means all cases are uncertain. So he quote tweets that. And this is just one of many. The Slate article outlined many more, including the soccer player.
And he was here legally.
And he was here legally. He was allowed in. So here is from Causation News. This mother said her son believed that he was being deported to Venezuela, but they took him to El Salvador's CICOT, which is the name of the prison. Venezuelans marched on Monday to condemn the inhumane measures taken by the U.S. and El Salvador against migrants. So this is another detail that's kind of hidden in plain sight here that some people miss the first time. In fact, it didn't really register to me how problematic this was. But yeah, most of the people being sent to El Salvador are not El Salvadoran. So it's not like that country has any jurisdiction over them. This may as well be a Guantanamo Bay. We're just using this as like a third party kind of black site. These are Venezuelans being shipped off to El Salvador, a country that has no real natural jurisdiction over them. So here's the mother of someone who's gotten mixed up in all of this.
Jesús Gabriel Ross Ortega.
¿Y cuándo fue la última vez que supo de él? ¿Cuándo se comunicó él? ¿Dónde estaba?
La semana pasada fue que tuve comunicación con él el día jueves, donde nos dijo que lo habían deportado y que el vuelo salía para Venezuela de sábado para domingo. Vuelo que nunca llegó porque eso fue lo que le hicieron creer allá, que venían deportados a Venezuela, pero fue mentira. O sea, la deportación era para El Salvador. Violaron todos sus derechos, todos sus derechos. De hecho, él tenía su corte el día de hoy y no respetaron ni siquiera eso. Cuando él ya tenía una fecha de corte que fue el día de hoy. Y mi hijo no es delincuente, mi hijo no pertenece a ninguna banda delictiva. Mi hijo es un muchacho que él lo que busca es de emprender. Él se fue buscando un sueño, como todo muchacho joven. Pero todo esto se volvió fue una pesadilla. Pesadilla para él y pesadilla para nosotros, su familia, que lo extrañamos muchísimo porque él es buen hijo, es buen hermano, es buen amigo. Mira, mi hijo es excelente ser humano. Y el que tenga 2 tatuajes, eso no define una persona. No lo define y no me parece justo. No me parece justo.
Es un plan
de verdad
por la derecha
necesito de
junto a los intereses
de la ayuda, que me traigan a mí,
el broche de oro se
que
lo
lo traigan, porque
el gran negocio.
en esa cárcel corre mucho riesgo y pido por él y por todos los migrantes, no solamente por mí, sino por todos los migrantes, que los regresen a Venezuela, que los regresen.
Por eso es que él está feliz.
And at this point, Venezuela is willing to take them back. So there's just absolutely no point in doing this, except there is certainly an incentive on the part of Nayib Bukele and the El Salvadoran government. But she mentioned the fate that her son is having to suffer in this prison. So now we're going to take a look at Sikot Prison. Here are some shots from inside this jail, some photos of what conditions are like in here. 40,000 prisoner capacity here. This is incarceration on an industrial scale, quite literally an industrial scale, as we'll learn in a little bit. Here's another shot. Here's another shot. Here they are. This is in April 2020. So they were being very COVID safe by masking all of these people, making them literally lean on each other, packed hundreds to a room. That's where people are. People who came legally, who are not gang members, who are awaiting asylum hearings, they are now living in hell. The Conversation publishes this piece, beating, overcrowding. I'm hearing a little echo. Can you lower your monitor a little bit? Maybe it's mine. I'm going to lower my monitor just a tad. Thank you. Appreciate that. Perfect. All right. Beatings, overcrowding, and food deprivation. U.S. deportees face distressing human rights conditions in El Salvador's mega prison. Nayib Bukele has led El Salvador since 2019, winning the presidency by vowing to crack down on the crime and corruption that had plagued the nation. But he has also circumvented democratic norms, for example, by rewriting the Constitution so that he could be reelected in 2024. For the past 3 years, Bukele has governed with few checks and balances under a self-imposed state of exception. This emergency status has allowed Bukele to suspend many rights as he wages what he calls a war on gangs. The crackdown manifests in mass arbitrary arrests of anyone who fits stereotypical demographic characteristics of gang members, like having tattoos, a prior criminal record, or even just looking nervous. Wow, bad time to open a tattoo parlor in Venezuela or El Salvador. Or Miami, for that matter. As a result of the ongoing mass arrests, El Salvador now has the highest incarceration rate in the world. That's right. They even surpassed the United States. The proportion of its population that El Salvador incarcerates is more than triple that of the U.S. and double that of the next nearest country, Cuba. Bukele's tough-on-gangs persona has earned him widespread popularity at home and abroad. He has fostered an immediate friendship with the new U.S. administration in particular. But maintaining this popularity has involved, it is widely alleged, manipulating crime statistics, attacking journalists who criticize him, and denying involvement in a widely documented secret gang pact that unraveled just before the start of the state of exception. That's right. He cut a deal with MS-13 to keep the murder rate down so that it would look like his policies were working. Bukele and pro-government Salvadoran media insist that the crackdown on gangs has transformed El Salvador into the safest country in Latin America. But on the ground, Salvadorans have described how police, military personnel, and Mexican cartels have taken over the exploitative practices previously carried out by gangs like MS-13 and Barrio 18. One Salvadoran woman whose son died in prison just a few days after he was arbitrarily detained told a reporter from Al Jazeera, "One is always afraid. Before it was fear of the gangs. Now it's also the security forces who take innocent people." Bukele's crackdown on gangs has come at a huge cost to human rights, and nowhere is this seen more than in El Salvador's prison system. Bukele has ordered a communication blackout between incarcerated people and their loved ones. This means no visits, no letters, and no phone calls. Such lack of contact makes it nearly impossible for people to determine the well-being of their incarcerated family members, many of whom are parents with young children now cared for by extended family. Despite the blackout, scholars, international and national rights groups, and investigative journalists have been able to build up a picture of conditions inside El Salvador's prisons through interviews with victims and their family members, medical records, and forensic analysis of cases of prison deaths. What they describe is a hellscape. Incarcerated Salvadorans are packed into grossly overcrowded cells, beaten regularly by prison personnel, and denied medicines even when they are available. Inmates are frequently subjected to punishments including food deprivation and electric shocks. Indeed, a U.S. State Department's 2023 country report on El Salvador noted the harsh and life-threatening prison conditions. The human rights organization Cristosal estimates that hundreds have died from malnutrition, blunt force trauma, strangulation, and lack of life-saving medical treatment. Often, their bodies are buried by government workers in mass graves without notifying families. That's why people go in, they disappear. There's never reports that they died. They never come out. People are left wondering.
Right. That's why they're not allowing them contact with the family, so they won't know anything.
Yep, exactly. Although El Salvador is a signatory to the United Nations Convention Against Torture, Amnesty International concluded after multiple missions to the country and interviews with the victims and their families that there is systemic use of torture in Salvadoran prisons. Although El Salvador, just copied that paragraph. Likewise, a case-by-case study by Cristosal, which included forensic analysis of exhumed bodies of people who died in prison, determined in 2024 that torture has become a state policy. So we could see, obviously, just the absolute horror that so many totally innocent people are having to live through now because they had a tattoo that Tom raised in a metal box Homan and his gang of goons thought looks like a gang tattoo, right? But now this is an interesting piece. This is published by a conservative outlet, the American Conservative. So what's in it for Nayib Bukele to take all of these dangerous gang members into his industrial prison farm? Bukele makes prison pay. The president of El Salvador hopes to make hay with an unusual business proposition. This is not published in the Daily Worker. This is published in the American Conservative. Let's take a look at this. This is short. El Salvador's offer to open its prison system to American inmates is an unusual one. Generally, criminals are not an import of choice. Bukele, however, is an enterprising businessman as well as a capable politician, and he sees his country's prison system as an asset that can be profitably leveraged. The deal runs thus. The U.S. deports criminal illegal aliens to be incarcerated in El Salvador's Terrorism Containment Center megaprison, also known as CCOT. In this case, gang members from El Salvador's own MS-13, as well as those from dangerous Venezuelan group Tren de Aragua. In return, the U.S. government pays El Salvador $20,000 a year per inmate to house, feed, and most importantly, guard them. This is about half the cost that would be expended were the inmates enrolled in the federal system of penitentiaries here in the U.S., a massive savings for the U.S. government. At the same time, with a GDP per capita of less than $6,000, this far exceeds the cost per prisoner expended by El Salvador's prison system, allowing Bukele to turn a tidy profit off the operation. So, this may sound extreme, and I don't mean this, on YouTube, we have to be careful how we say this because there are certain contexts that you have to provide. I'm not accusing any specific person of a specific illicit act, but what we just described there is human trafficking. That's what this is. This is for-profit human trafficking. It is sweeping up people, shipping them across borders in bondage for profit. That's what this is. This is a human trafficking operation. He's doing this for money. It enriches his country to take in criminals. He gets paid far more per year to house them than it costs him to care for them, quote unquote. Not only do they not care for them, it sounds like they straight up fucking torture them. And so that's what's happening right now to people who have come to the country legally. Even if they came to the country illegally, they don't deserve this. Even if they are violent gang members, they should be afforded a day in court so that we can prove that they're violent gang members. And I would say that gang members from Venezuela, if you're gonna deport them, you deport them to Venezuela, to their country where their government has jurisdiction over them. This is absolutely fucking barbaric and insane. And I've seen people respond to this, just absolute pathetic people. I have no sympathy. Okay, if you have no sympathy for a soccer player who was mistaken for a gang member to be shipped off to this for-profit torture facility, you are just a broken person. Either some traumatic event in your past has broken you, or you've been worn down over a number of years to the point where you have no faith that your life is going to improve and you just take out your misery on more vulnerable people. But anybody who is okay with this is just a broken person. It's such a despicable story.
Yeah, this is where I'm going to have to take a page from your book. This is a very strong argument that America needs to collapse because we are committing such horrific crimes against people around the world. And now you have an administration that really, and hey, we were among those saying, well, to say fascism, that's an exaggeration. They're going to do away with democracy. But as this particular administration started to take shape, the first administration, I think that was hyperbolic. This administration, this is straight up. They're trying to establish an authoritarian dictatorship. Yeah, man. I mean, you'll still have the trappings of democracy, just like Rome kept a Senate after Caesar had essentially neutralized all power other than the emperor. They still did their bureaucratic, small ball kind of voting. They were able to manage little things in the empire. But they had no real power. The emperor could execute them at any time. You'll still have your Senate. You'll still have your Congress. But an executive that wields the kind of power that they're attempting to wield is a dictator. It's a modern version of a monarch. That is what they want. That is the Curtis Yarvin playbook. You go look at the Curtis Yarvin theory of government. You tell me it does not match exactly the moves that they're making. This is why running around and screaming about how judges need to be dragged out of their houses is very, very dangerous. They are trying to take a population that's mostly ignorant of the Constitution and checks and balances and the basic premise of the country, and convince them that the judges are not allowed to do this. This is exactly what they're supposed to do. What the judge is doing, trying to hold this administration accountable and get some justice for these people who have been illegally deported to a third-party country that they're not even from, in a prison that violates just basic standards of human rights. All of that aside, a prison like that should not exist. The people who run it should be held accountable according to the international law that El Salvador itself is a signatory to.
Right.
This is what judges are, your only real line of defense against a completely out of control executive branch like this, that that regardless of the facts, regardless of the truth, in order to satisfy a base that is largely made up of what you describe, people who are so broken and dispirited that the only pleasure they can imagine getting is through somebody else's suffering. They know how to please that audience. Yeah, you see that guy? He had a tattoo. We're sending him to the worst place on earth. Yeah, you're right. If you get satisfaction from that, you're a broken person. Unfortunately, Trump, this administration, is the result of at least one, possibly two, maybe three generations that are broken, that have become increasingly dispirited and incapable of thinking critically. That's how you get this. A guy like Donald Trump had run for president in 1965. People would have laughed at him.
Right.
Would have laughed. He makes George Wallace look serious. What? Like, nobody would have even considered taking a guy like that seriously as a candidate for president. That is a result of decades of destroying people's communities, destroying people's futures, destroying people's dreams. And now they're just, all they have left is rage. And, Trump feeds that. But when you look at this, when you look at the just absolute evil that we're responsible for, from this to Gaza, yeah, I mean, where's the downside? There's a downside for us because we live here. But if you look at the global picture, where's the downside to the American economy collapsing to the point that it can't afford to do things like this? I don't really see one from a global perspective.
All right. Well, I guess my work here is done.
You sold me. Rachel Zegler too. You're putting wins on the board tonight.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Even the critical drinker came around on Zegler.
That's right. Putting wins on the board.
Please clap.